Hello, hello. I'm here. Hey, Henry, your volume's not working. Go into your XSplit. Go find the microphone and turn it on. Right. Go to the part where it says default microphone. Yes. Look for settings. Yeah. Try the video. That's fine. Try going to no, it's already there. You see where the sound it has a little gear icon there to the right. Yeah, where it says microphone. Change default, whichever one you want, and then click OK.
And okay. Can you hear me now? Can anybody hear me now? Somebody got to type something so Ala Toledo can tell me if I'm okay.
Yep, that's working. That's working. Go ahead and start.
Man, we got to remember it. I got to remember, but I just, I'm not. I won't remember, just like always. Hello and welcome to another live stream from the only source of information you need on the internet today. And as usual, we are going to start our show by reading my latest writings. And this is something I wrote yesterday. It's a little bit off track, but not really. I've been writing the script for the Melchizedek video, which most of you know. And as I've been writing, I've been kind of separating the parts that I want in part 2 from part 1. And I may never, ever publish part 2, but at the same time, maybe I will. So yesterday I took everything that was in the Melchizedek script that I didn't want in part 1, and I put it in a separate text document, and I kind of got off track and was working on that all day instead of working on the part 1, which is supposed to be coming out soon. So we'll go ahead and start, and it's going to be just like any other sustenance and covering video. Hello and welcome to another video from the only source of information that you need to not only survive the current apocalypse, but actually enjoy it. And today we're going to be continuing our discussion about Melchizedek. As angry as you might be right now at your former pastor or religion in general for concealing the identity of Melchizedek, it is about to get much worse, because the reason that they have kept Melchizedek's true identity from you is much more insidious than what you might currently be thinking. Most of the clues about what Melchizedek represents can be found in the Bible book of Hebrews. Over the years, I have studied a lot of what is in the Bible, not directly from the Bible itself, but from others. And the standard church teaching about the book of Hebrews is that it was written by Paul in the first century. I always just took it for granted that this was a provable fact. But just like many church teachings, this is not a fact at all. Many of the books of the Bible begin with some kind of introduction revealing the identity of the author as well as other background information. The book that has become known as Hebrews simply starts off by saying, "To the Hebrews," with absolutely nothing recorded to reveal the identity of the writer. In the New Testament, there are several forms of the word that we translate as Hebrew. Several represent the Hebrew language, but in this case, the word represents the Hebrew people. It would be accurate to say that the book of Hebrews, in its original language, begins with the phrase, "To the descendants of Eber." Remember that in part 1 of this series, Eber was the last of Isaac's ancestors to die. For the 29 years following Shem's death, it could be said that Eber was the rightful ruler of the Promised Land. The information in the book of Hebrews is unlike anything recorded anywhere else in the Bible. The unusual subject matter, the amount of information not found in any other book, the unusual way that the information is presented is similar to books such as Job, Song of Songs, Esther, Malachi, or Revelation. It is almost as if the book did not even have a human author, but was simply presented in its written form to mankind directly from the hand of God himself. Hebrews chapter 1 and verse 2 says, "God has spoken to us in these last days through his Son, who was appointed heir, by whom also he made the universe." According to this verse, Jesus really is God's Son. The Greek word used here is the same word used many times throughout the Bible to describe the relationship between a father and a child. In most verses using this word, the subject is obviously male. However, it is also obvious that this is not always necessarily the case. Probably a more appropriate rendering of this word would be offspring or child. In support of this concept, this child is also called an heir. As defined by Strong's Concordance, the word heir means one who receives his allotted possession by right of sonship. But understanding that the Greek word huios can mean son or daughter, it should also be understood that an heir could also be a son or daughter. However, the word that is translated as universe is aeon, which should really be rendered as age. In the ancient Greek world, the word aeon meant a very long period of time, but not an eternity. The English word aeon is based on the Greek word aeon, but in English this word is now used as an actual measure of time, normally equaling 1,000,000 years. In the ancient past, the length of time was not defined. And that's that for this week. So who do we have here with us today? Did I lose you? Uh-oh.
No, I'm here. Sorry. Before we go into the hellos, can you take off that second webcam and the microphone? Can you dial it back to half the thing there.
Uh-oh, what do I need to do now?
You're looking at it right there. You see how there's two webcams right
Yeah,
there?
Right, I do. Oh, take this one off, maybe.
Take one of them off.
Okay.
And then bring the mic. Okay, the mic volume. No, put the mic volume back up.
Okay, and then
put it halfway.
Halfway. Okie doke.
No. Put the mic volume as halfway.
Like that? That is a mic.
A little bit more. Yeah, right there. Yeah.
That sounds good.
Okay, now remove one of the check boxes from the mic, from the webcam.
Oh, I see what's going on here. Logitech. Okay, so does it matter which one?
No, doesn't matter.
Okay. And do I need to press anything to say go, or that's it?
Nope. No, that's it. Okay. This week, let's see. We have at the top of the list is Mishu. It says, hello, Henry. Mishu seems to always be the first one here for some reason.
He must have ultra-high-speed internet.
Says, hello. Maybe. Synoptic Problem says, hey, y'all. Marie's Vegetable Garden says, hello, guys. Betty Labont says, hi, everyone. Chester Richardson says, hello, everyone. Saturn Chicken. And that's a new user. Good evening, folks. Matt Wilcox says, if you don't want to survive or even thrive, I'm not sure if that's a jab at you or not. Sleepy Girl 85 says, hey, guys. Super U 68 says, hello, friends. A Chain of Hill says, hello, Sustenance and Alley. Uncle Nesta says, say uncle. Mark and I are here. Mr. A. Brownfield says hi. Simple Sister Living says hi, y'all. Hi, Ali Toledo and Sustenance and Covering. Kitch Cool's here over from England. He says, hey, everyone. Katie Cooks and Crafts says, hello, everyone. Looking forward to this live stream. Karen Bain says, sorry I missed you last week. Mr. 76 Aspen says, I'm here. First question tonight comes from A Chain of Hills. She mentions, she says that you mentioned in the podcast your life has been unbearable during making the Melchizedek video, and also mentioned praying out loud for your wife only brought more chaos. We call this being spiritually attacked, which I've also experienced. What is the best course of action when facing such an attack?
Well, like we talked about in the podcast, you know, I have gone completely to praying silently without being any kind of religious position. I don't get on my knees and hold my hands in the air, anything like that, because I really, I feel like I've got to do this stealthily. You know, I know that there's no way to keep the demons from harassing my family or myself. But there's no reason to give them hints at when is the best time to attack. You know, as I said before, that things really get bad around here whenever I'm working on something like this Melchizedek script, or even in the past when I did the Written in Stone script, All Seeing Eye script, the Angels and Men script. That was hard just because suddenly my life just gets terrible and I can't concentrate. I can't do anything. Everybody's pulling me in a different direction, and there's no way that's a coincidence. You know what I mean? Anyways, by the way, the podcast she's talking about is available on our website, and Chain of Hills actually participated, as have others in the past, and we always look forward to having podcasts where we have people to help us out, you know, because a lot of times we're struggling to figure out what we want to talk about. But if you have something you really want to talk about that's going to take more time than we normally, you know, that I'm willing to dedicate to keyboard, then that's the place to do it. And we are more than happy to have you. You know, something I wanted to ask.
Next question comes from...
Before we go on, a Synoptic Problem was asking us to pray for him last week, and I was a little concerned, you know, because he was having trouble swallowing. If he could just type back a little message and you could let us all know how he's doing, you know, because pretty much everybody here is the same people here last week. Yeah,
let's see hear how he's doing. And also, can you move your mic down off of your beard? It's still a little loud. The next question comes from Synoptic Problem. They say, if the law of cause and effect governs everything in the universe, how can human beings be the exception to this rule? In other words, how can humans have free will? isn't free will an illusion?
Well, science is an illusion. I mean, obviously there are parts of science that you cannot deny. You know, if you take a magnet and you put it on something that's steel, so magnetism is real. You know, you set something on fire, it gets hot. You know, you pressurize it, it gets hot just from being pressurized. And so we know that the physical laws of the universe are real. What we don't know is whether or not the men who tell us they know and understand the physical laws of the universe are lying. So, you know, when I talk about praying, there's no scientist on earth will tell you that your prayers go to God. So there must be some part of scientific law that exists that either scientists are lying to us about, or they just don't understand, and they're too uppity to admit they don't understand it. You know, this what's about to happen to our Earth is going to defy the laws of physics. But that's only because the laws of physics do not include an all-powerful being able to move solar systems at will.
Uncle Nesta chimes in and says, free will isn't an illusion. And Proverbs 3:5 says, lean not on your own understanding. And just to read it out, it says, so you will find favor and good repute in the sight of God and man. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight.
Yeah, you know, I'm a big sci-fi fan. I mean, I don't really watch much TV, but when I watch TV, it's always like Star Trek or something, and they always, you know, going into alternate realities or going back in time and accidentally leaving their toothbrush there, and then when they go back home, you know, half the world is dead because they moved some object or whatever. So, you know, I understand the concept of, you know, this, I don't know, what is it called, chaos theory or whatever, and I don't know if any of that's real. You know, I don't think everything I do is, like I said last week, you know, I don't think everything I do is predestined. Otherwise, I wouldn't wear a seatbelt. They're uncomfortable, you know. But then again, like I said, some people would say me wearing a seatbelt is predestined. If I choose not to wear it, well, that was predestined too.
Pop Tartum chimes in with the quote from that Nesta gave, but they say the Book of Job was his favorite, and then Matt Wilcox says the Book of Job is the oldest in the Bible. And do you have any comments about the Book of Job?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, if you read the Bible, we pretty much know all the Greek books are the New Testament. That's later because the Greeks didn't have enough influence back prior to the Greek Empire to have had, you know, written books. Like we know that the book of Hebrews, which it only exists in ancient Greek, and I guess there's some copies that were made in about the 12th century that are still around. But that's all. Anything that's Greek is from like 1st century on, maybe the 4th century BC at the earliest. And there's quotes in the Bible about animals and plants and things that match quotes in the Old Testament. But when you read the Old Testament, you see all kinds of strange creatures that don't show up again in the New Testament. And in fact, you know, when people who study language will go back and say, oh, look, this is a zebra. You know, whatever the Hebrew word for zebra is, they know. They look and say, oh, that's zebra. And this is whatever, a bear, and here's a lion. And they know what those creatures are, but the farther you go back in the Bible, the more oddball names, you know, proper nouns exist, but we don't know what they mean. You know, but since the Hebrew language is such that you can take and break it down and kind of figure out what they mean, we've got words in the Hebrew language that mean like big giant reptile monster. You know, so it's like, okay, that doesn't appear in Greek. So what is the church's explanation for that? Well, a big giant reptile monster would be that's a hippopotamus. And, no, it isn't. You know, I mean, Job is asking. He says, "Can you reach your arms all the way around the tail of Behemoth?" It's like, well, hippopotamus tail is this big. Yeah, I can reach my arms around the tail of a hippopotamus. So obviously, there are a lot of creatures that don't exist in the newer books of the Bible that do exist in the older one. And as far as I'm concerned, the book of Job has more ancient creatures in it that don't exist anymore than any other book of the Bible. I honestly thought for a long time that maybe that Abel wrote that right before he was killed. You know, we're talking about right back in the days of Adam, but it could have been Noah, could have been Shem. And since the book of Job is in poetry form for the most part, you know, that's like an old trick for indigenous peoples that didn't have writing. So it's possible that the story of Job was created by Adam or Abel and passed down word of mouth all the way to whoever was the first guy to come up with paper and write it down. So yeah, it's probably a pre-flood story because there's too many creatures in there that probably didn't survive the flood.
Synoptic Problem says that he's still having problems with his voice and swallowing, but he says thanks for praying. Uncle Nesta chimes in. I'm not sure about the praying aspect. He says, I don't know, he tied it into Yoda, where Yoda says, whenever anybody quotes Yoda from Star Wars, they say the part where he says, do or do not, there's no try. The full quote says no try, not do or do not, there is no try, always do it.
Yeah, well, you know, Yoda spoke Hebrew. He was speaking English. He was speaking the English version of Hebrew because Hebrew is backwards from Greek. You know, so I always when I'm looking at I've learned like there's several different resources for finding ancient Hebrew texts of the Bible, and if you get one that's laid out properly, you can see the true order of things. Like if you're trying to figure out which one of Noah's kids were born first, you go and look and read the thing. It's, you know, in our Bible it says Shem, Ham, and Japheth, but in the Hebrew I think it says Japheth, Ham, and Shem because it's backwards. But the only reason I even checked that is because I'm trying my best to figure out if the guys that translated it got it right. You know, that's like Yoda talk. He always has his stuff a little bit backwards. All right, I'm done. I shouldn't have even said anything.
Hey, your microphone is still a little distorted. Where is your mic at right now?
On my throat.
It's like you're blowing it away. So, I don't know, maybe put it on your shirt or something.
There I am. You probably can't see me, but I got it on my shirt now, right above my pocket. Hopefully people can hear me. My neighbors can probably hear me. They don't, and they're not on the internet.
A couple more hellos. Pop Turntum says they're here. Ryder71 says it's me. Douglas Aliff says hello from Las Vegas, and Who Me says hello late but here. Next question comes from SuperU68. Henry, when you pray, how do you ask for help and how do you praise God?
That's personal. Oh, do you want me to elaborate? Oh, well, actually, I will elaborate. Check out the podcast. We did our whole podcast this week, and it's the most recent one. It's right there. When you go to sustenanceandcovering.com, at the top, I think it says podcast, right? Isn't that correct?
Yeah, there's a link to the podcast.
Yeah, and the
covering.com.
Yeah, the title of the podcast this week is prayer, I think. And so I went into that, right. You know. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that I pray, but like I said in the podcast, when I'm praying with my family, you know, which my family is not real hip to prayer, and it's just embarrasses them sometimes. But I try to make it comfortable for them. And like if it's a meal, like if I end up at my mom's house and there's relatives over, they'll always ask me if I want to pray. And I'll say, no, it's up to you. Do you want me to pray? Because I'm not going to do something if nobody wants me to do it. But when I do pray, it's always just a conversation. You know, Father, thank you so much that we get to be together. We love each other. But in this world, we oftentimes don't have time to show that love. And so it's wonderful that we can all be here and put our arms around it. You know, just a simple thing like that. I don't go into every now and then I'll try to scare people. We'll sit at a table and I'll reach out and grab people's hands, and they'll all start. It's like, no, you don't really have to do that. I was just seeing if you would have let me. But yeah, I'll I don't do the formal thing. One of the things that, and if, like I say, you should go to the podcast, because I think we spent an hour talking about prayer. But, it's nothing formal, because Jesus really, really didn't like that kind of stuff, And when people asked him, how do you pray? He said, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come. But nobody ever remembers the first part. The very first thing he said is like, before I tell you how to pray, I'm going to tell you how not to pray. Don't pray like religious people who like to use a lot of big words and sound really fancy. Don't do that. Matthew chapter 6, verse 8, I think.
Going back to Job, G Consciousness says, couldn't it be pre-flood because Job was an Edomite, or couldn't pre-flood Job be an Edomite? I'm not sure.
Was he an Edomite? Job was from the land of Ur. Actually, the way the book of Job starts in an English Bible is not very representative of what it actually says there. It says, there once was a man named Job who was the greatest of all those born in the East. And in the Hebrew language, it doesn't say that at all. It says, there once was a man who came out of the forest who had a reputation for being hated, and he faced into the front of the earth. So Job is like he represents it's like he represents the earth. His face is pointed towards the sun, is what it's saying, and he's comes out of the forest and has a reputation for being hated. I guess I need to do a video about Job, because I don't think I've done one. Maybe I did. I don't know.
I think this is related to Job, but I'm not that well versed in it. Pop Tartum says, I was a bit perturbed at the mention of Leviathan and Behemoth. Is that?
Yeah, those are them. That's Job, Leviathan, and Behemoth. Because they're neither one of them. I don't think either one of those words appear anywhere else in the Bible. There's a few other words that appear in Job that appear later on, and this will shake you up, Pop Tartum, is the word seraph. Seraph, it comes out as seraph. Have seraphs and cherubs, but the word seraph actually means flying, fiery reptile. Literally, that's what seraph means, is flying, fiery reptile. What's kind of odd about that, I found that when I was reading the Book of Mormon, that it says that Moses was attacked by flying, fiery reptiles, which is goofy, but that really is how the account goes in the book of Exodus, because Moses and the Israelites were going across the wilderness, and they started to sin, and so God sent these flying, fiery reptiles to bite them, and their venom would cause the Israelites to die. And so God told Moses to take and make this satanic symbol. It was a stick with the snakes wrapped around it, or a snake. Well, really what it says is put a flying, fiery reptile on the stick and make everybody look up to it. And the reference is to Draco, the dragon, which is seraph, in Greek. In Hebrew, seraph is fiery, flying reptile. In Greek, that's in Hebrew. In Greek, it's Draco. And then there is, or Draconus. Then in Latin, it's Draco. And it ends up in our books as dragon. See, a dragon is a flying, fiery reptile, just like a seraph back in that day. So that word ends up going all the way through. But I think the later books, it's a reference to the dragon over the North Pole. It's constellation Draco. So, but it really, in our day, you know what that is, right? Pterodactyl. I mean, that's all it could be. There's only, how many flying reptiles are there? Now, whether or not they're fiery, I don't know. We just have skeletal remains, so it's hard to tell if they actually breathe fire, if that's what that means. People have speculated that the fiery part meant that they were red. So a flying red dragon, or a flying red reptile.
Is that the behemoth? Because Synoptic Problem is saying a friend of his just this week said he heard something about Leviathan spirit. So he wants to know,
Leviathan,
do you know anything about?
If you break down the word Leviathan, the Hebrew word Leviathan, it sounds like what we would call a brontosaur, but it was like an aquatic animal. You know, you ever see those like brontosaurs that have flippers? So it may have been that, the flipper version of a brontosaur, or it could be the brontosaurs that stood on their legs. Those things are really huge. If they were walking around on the earth, it would have been really difficult for them to not like crush everything. So they were probably like a hippopotamus. They would have been like walking on in water that was pretty shallow, you know, like 20 feet deep or something. So they're all some kind of a reptile, behemoth. And there's several others that I don't know if they're from the original Greek. It might be the same one, like Coccopris, Cockaprice. That's another one that ends up in the King James. It's probably the same thing, but I don't know.
Saturn Chicken says about the topic of Job, says, I just finished a study before I came to this one where it dated Job to be around 350 years after the flood.
Possibly. Well, you know, the whole thing is when you do forensic stuff, you got to kind of go back to what your oldest copy is, and I think the oldest copy of Job is like around the time of Christ. We really don't have, but we know that it was from something older because things happen in the translation process where it's like even today, if you find some kind of a clue, if somebody at a crime scene finds a clue, it may be a written document that's in English, but by reading the document, you can tell by the way it's written if it was someone who didn't speak English as a first language. Like a Spanish speaker will write an English document differently than somebody from the Czech Republic, and obviously different than somebody who grew up in an English-speaking world. I mean, you can even tell the difference between somebody writing in America and somebody writing in Britain. You know, it's not because they put their accent in it. That's not in there, but their sentence structure is often different. So, I mean, that's probably is. It probably is very, very old. I think it's older than Genesis. You know, we always say Genesis is the oldest book in the Bible. I don't think so.
Yeah, Saturn Chicken's point, I think he follows up and says it was thought that Job's writer had passed on memories, maybe retold down through the years from even before the flood. And then Pop Tart chimes in, this is why I don't care about aging anything. You know.
Yeah, you know, some things are pretty obvious. If you find a skeleton and you can tell that it had cloth on it, right? And it's got, like it had a suit, the skeleton was wearing a suit, and you can see that there are like coins sitting right where the pocket would have been. You know, if the coin says 1927 on it, then you know that the guy didn't die in 1950. Or he didn't die in 1900. He could have died in 1950 if he had some old coins, but you know, you wouldn't have 1,000-year-old coins, and you wouldn't have coins from the future. So it's very rare that you can date anything. When they start, you know, I think that stuff that's maybe 500, 1,000 years old, carbon-14 probably works somewhat. You know, scientists say it works perfectly within like 1 nanosecond or something. But you get into radiometric dating, that's just alchemy. You know, I mean, I'm not a stupid guy. I've studied nuclear engineering in school, and you know, I kind of understood it. So I can tell you that there are things that are taught as truth that they're not truth.
Going back to the subject of praying, Uncle Nestor chimes in and says, religious people like to quote scripture when they want to tell you to get a haircut. But then they don't tell you 2 verses later, it says, don't worry about your haircut. Just praise the Lord. And in his opinion, they should just let their hair grow and stop telling people like him how to live. Just praise in the Spirit and truth. Religious people stink from the Pharisees all the way on to today. And then Synoptic Problem says, if I'm going bald and can't have dreads, am I in trouble?
I was going to say something inappropriate and funny, but this is not me and you talking. This is everybody on YouTube can see this. But yeah, I mean, you can make any religion you want out of scriptures. I always say that, but you can't make a religion out of the Bible. If you read the Bible from start to finish, you're not going to come up with a list of things to do with candles and pentagrams. But you could probably find 2 or 3 verses that if you don't make candles and pentagrams, you're going to all eternal fires of hell or something. But as far as not being able to grow dreadlocks, you could always grow those ones on the side. Like I tell people, right now I look like I got dreadlocks. But I mean, this is I'm not going to show you my head. But anyways, as I get older, I'm going to look like Bozo with dreadlocks, and I'm cool with that because I'm already there. I've got all the hair on my head is not enough to make a single dreadlock nowadays. The top part.
Going back to the dating of Job, Synoptic Problem says I have to disagree with the dating of Job. I think it's later response to hyper Deuteronomic view of good equals blessings and evil equals curses.
That's like once again, people can make anything they want out of a verse, but if you read the whole Bible, Job has some really oddball things in it that don't make any sense as written. You know, it's like a lot of Jesus' stories. Jesus gets up there and he says, there was a wedding feast, and there were 10 virgins, and 5 of them had candles or lamps, and the other 5 of them had oil in their lamps, and the other 5 didn't. That's not really telling you about how to put oil in lamps. There's something else going on there. You know, the lighted virgins represent the planets that would be lighted throughout all of time until the wedding feast, and that's what we have now. We have 5 planets that are visible from the Earth with the naked eye. Now there is also stories, we know for a fact there are 2 planets that are not visible, and there are also stories of 3 other planets that are no longer around, and we've got these asteroid belts, so it's possible that that's what that's about. Same thing with the book of Job. Job is, you know, he's this guy, and he's got 7 sons and 3 daughters, so once again, you know, there's 10, 7 and 3, and right now, what do we have? We've only got 5 visible, but all total, from the Earth, there are 7 planets that we know of. Because even though we can't see them all, we know that Neptune is there. We know that Uranus is there. Even though they are invisible, no human can see Uranus or Neptune with the naked eye. You have to have a really nice telescope, and not one from Walmart or Sears and Roebuck. It's got to be something really nice. And so that's where those 7 and 3 come in again. The 7 that are still there, and the 3 that are missing. And you know, the whole story of Job is how all his sons get killed, all of his daughters get killed, and then they all get brought back at the end. And then there's this 8th person that jumps in at the end of the story. He says, I kept my mouth shut for a long time because y'all are older than me. But my name is Elihu. And first off, you 3 guys, which are the 3 men that replaced Job's daughters, they come in and they comfort Job, supposedly, false comforters, says, you 3 guys are idiots. And then he looks at Job and he says, and you know what? Since you were listening to him, you're an idiot too. But now we're going to straighten all that out. And I think that's more or less has to do with the destruction of our solar system and the repair of our solar system. Because as time goes on, you know, you'll actually have visible celestial objects within each of the 12 houses. Remember that Job would go around and eat with each of his kids in their house. Well, astrologically speaking, all religions around the earth acknowledge the constellations as the houses. So Job is not about what the churches tell us. You know, well, here's the thing about Job. Job is supposedly written by Moses. So that's the church's story, and they're pretty much sticking to that. And I just honestly can't, when I read Job, I'm not reading the same kind of writings as Exodus, Genesis, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. I actually don't even think Moses wrote most of those because some of it's too close to the book of Joshua. You know, that's the next book. And it seems like Joshua had to have written it because Moses was dead. Well, Joshua seems an awful lot like Leviticus and Deuteronomy to me. And Exodus, really.
Mr. A. Brownfield chimes in and says, Job video would be great if you could do that.
Yeah, I need to.
One quick hi comes from Jake Green's Model Car Shop. He says, hi, Henry. Vincent S. says, the 10 Virgins story, he thought it was about the prepared and about being prepared and being faithful.
If you take a story out of the Bible, and this is on purpose, I'm sure, depending on what kind of person you are, if you're a person that wants to know these details about what's about to happen, I think that's what we're getting to now. You know, we're in the last days. But not everybody lived in the last days. There were people that lived 1,000 years ago, and the only hope they had was what they could get out of the Bible or out of their church. And so, and most of them didn't even have a Bible, so they'd have to go to the church, and the bishop or cardinal or priest would get up there, and he would read the stories that are in the Bible, and then he would say, okay, this means, you know, don't steal, or don't lie, don't cheat. So those kind of lessons are in there. And those lessons are what have supported humanity for the last 6,000 years. I think it's only now that we're getting these secondary lessons, which are the actual real purpose for why the stories were written. Because, you know, if you look like the book of the Song of Songs, I remember when I posted a video about that Usamos was like, wow, I've been thinking this was ridiculous for so long. And anybody out there, honestly, I got a video, and I think can't remember which one it is, but if you go back and read the book of Song of Songs, or the Song of Solomon, or Canticles of Canticles, however they, because you know, every church calls it something different, but that book makes no sense whatsoever. It is a literally nonsensical. But if you take all the numbers that are in there and you look up the names of the characters, you'll see that what's going on is, once again, it's about the solar system. It's about what are those, sundial? It's about a sundial, you know, whatever those are called now. But it's about the sundial, and about how the shadow would go exactly where it was supposed to, and it would always be exactly on its mark. And there were 360 days, and there were 12 months, and this woman is on one side of the table and the man is on the other side of the table, and they're chasing each other and they're never able to catch up. Well, that's not the way it is now. That's the sun and the moon are the man and the woman. You know, Solomon is the sun, Sol, and the moon is Aishash. So they're chasing each other and they're never catching. But in our solar system, the sun and the moon catch up with each other all of the time, because the moon is called out of conjunction. You know, a lot of ancient cultures left records that the sun and the moon at one time were in conjunction, which would lead to a 360-day year. And cultures around the earth had 360-day calendars forever. And then about 2,700 years ago, all of a sudden, cultures had no calendars because no one could figure out how things worked with the sun and the moon out of conjunction. So, I mean, yeah, if you go back and read the Song of Songs, you know, most churches will tell you it's about the beautiful, loving relationship between God and His bride, and Jesus is the anointed shepherd of God's. You know, some people they got some kind of inspiration out of that. You know, when I was going to church and they would get up and start talking about that, I'd be like, wow, man, that dude up there is smart, because I never would have figured that out.
With regard to Job again, Synoptic Problem says, I don't think Job wasn't historical. It was written to correct the view that God always blesses the righteous and curses the wicked.
Yeah, well, you know, one of the things that I say about Job is that in the Bible, here's how I figure out if a Bible book is real. I mean, the way I try to figure it out. If it says that a certain man did something that's absolutely ridiculous, then I go look and see if there's other stories about that guy, right? So, you know, like Jesus talked about Lazarus going up to heaven, and the poor rich man down here going, please just put a drop of water on my tongue. I'm in hell burning on fire. That there, you know, Jesus had a friend named Lazarus, but it's obvious that that's not the same guy, and this guy he's talking about is never mentioned anywhere else. And plus, it even starts out by saying that Jesus spoke them a story, you know, a hyperbole. With Job is a little difficult because there's a couple of verses in there that say that, you know, Job was a good man, or that we should follow the pattern that Job set, but they never say anything about who his father was, or where he lived, or what his kids' names were, or who his wife was. There's nothing historical about him. So it's one of those ones where if Job was a real person, it's pretty cool, but if it wasn't a real person, it's still cool, you know, because it says that Job lived under the beautiful moon, which is spoken of as pre-flood, right, when the sea of glass was still there, and the moon would change colors every month. But then he lived under the lunar moon, which is once, like I said, 30 days. The moon was there it would change positions every 30 days, and at the end of the year it would line back up perfectly. Then he said he lived under the useless moon. So if this is a single individual, he had to have lived before the flood, he had to have lived after the flood, and then he had to live after the Babylonian conquest when the sun and moon went out of conjunction. But I'm not saying that there aren't other explanations for it. Like you've got guys like Jonah swallowed by a big fish, and it's like, okay, that wasn't a real guy. It couldn't have been. But in other books of the Bible, it says, okay, Jonah that went to Nineveh, his father was so-and-so, his kids were so-and-so, and if you follow Jonah, his kids became something famous. It's like he had to be a real person. So there really was a man at one time that was swallowed, and he stayed in a fish for 3 days. And Jesus apparently didn't see anything wrong with the story, because when the Pharisees asked for a sign, he says, the only sign I'm going to show you is Jonah going into the heart of the earth for 3 days. Speaking about himself.
Dale Rockwell joins and says, hey, y'all. I think going back to, I think you mentioned Moses wrote Job, and Katie Cooks and Craft says Moses says he's not great with words. Did he write poetry or something?
Yeah, there you go. Well, you know, yeah, that's the thing, is when Moses was brought before Pharaoh, he was told to go before Pharaoh, and he said, God, please don't send me before. I mean, this is Pharaoh. He's the king of the earth. I can't even talk. I can't talk to nobody. And he says, well, let me do this. Let me send your brother with you and let him talk. So when Moses went before Pharaoh, and it says Moses demanded that he let his people go, it was actually Aaron that was talking. So yeah, would Moses, if he wasn't good with words, well, he wasn't good with the spoken word, maybe with the written word. But the thing is that, like I said, with like the book of 1 Corinthians, it says, to the Corinthians, I, Paul, an apostle of Christ, and you know, defender of the faith. So you know, okay, the guy is representing himself as Paul. He's saying that he's writing this letter to specific people that we know really existed. There really was a Corinth. So that book we know. That book was written by Paul to the Corinthians. The book of Job, there once was a man named Job. He was the greatest of all the Orientals who came out of the East. There's nothing in there to give even hint at who wrote that. You know, we try to go by writing style, but a lot of times if you look at the guys that make those decisions, they're looking at the writing style in English. So they're like, okay, this book wrote by him. This book is written by that guy, because you can see the. But you can take 100 Greek text and have one translator translate them all, and it sounds like all 100 were written by one guy, because they were, because the guy that wrote it is the translator. You know, when you get the English version of it, so you got to look at kind of what's available outside of the English to kind of get a feel for it. And like I said before, you can look at something that's been translated into English, and you can tell if it was originally written by someone who spoke Spanish or a natural English speaker. So Job, no, there's nothing anywhere in Job to reveal who the writer was.
Vincent S. says maybe Job was written by Joseph.
Hey, you know this thing here, what are you talking about, Jesus' daddy or Joseph, the king of Egypt? Because you know what, there's a bunch of Josephs, but Joseph was one of the sons of Jacob that was sold into slavery by his brothers. But it could have been. He could have wrote it. You know what I read when I was reading about Hebrews? If you look up the book of Hebrews in Wikipedia, it says that there are theological arguments about whether or not Hebrews was written by Paul. And most people who seriously study it say that Paul could not have written Hebrews. But I think there was a woman around the same time that was Paul visited named Pauline. And so there were several people in the ancient past, not in really the ancient past, but like 1000 AD, like before the King James Bible was created. There were guys that were studying this Greek text in Greek, and they said Hebrews is unlike anything that's anywhere else in the Bible, and they believe that this person, Pauline, wrote it. And the reason that the name of the writer is not included is because no one would have any respect for the writing if they knew it was from a woman. That's just theory. That's just something somebody threw out there. You know, they were 1,000 years ago. They were like the cardinal of France or something, and so they got a lot of credentials. But so what? They're just like me and you. They're just taking a guess.
Now, there's a extensive discussion in the chat room about something, and I'll summarize it. It started off with Karen Bain asking about why you focus on planets, and then Great Bay 1961 explained it was the sun and the moon, and then that led into the idea that civilization is the problem on Earth, and then everybody started expressing how much we hate civilization, and then it comes into Synoptic got problems saying he likes parts of civilization, like YouTube is great, so why is that bad? And then it's come into things about exploitive and all those other things, and then let's see who says it. Oh, and then Great Bay 1961 makes an interesting comment about Amazon opening grocery stores that are totally computerized nowadays. So I guess do you have a comment about civilization and the role that technology plays within the system today?
Getting into religion. Religion is based on fear, and so the churches have this. They have this like reputation for using fear. So we got a 6,000 year history of people. Well, now we got the networks. So networks is our religion now. So that may lead into, that's part of what they're talking about, this new technology. But whenever you want to have a war, you take human beings that from birth know that killing is wrong. Take human beings from across this imaginary line who know that killing is wrong, and you make the people on this side of the line think everybody on this side of the line is out to get them, and vice versa. And you also, one of the ways you do that is you make this one here call his God Bill, you make this one call his God Frank. So obviously now we're not just on the other side of an imaginary line, we're worshiping, we're heretics. So you get people to slaughter one another. And part of that fear is that the religions use, like September 11th. Buildings are falling in, so now everybody in the United States just knows their house is going to cave in the next day. That nobody cares about a bunch of billionaires with a 100-story building somewhere. They care about their own house. So you have to somehow get people to believe that that's going to happen to their house. And if you look at what Jesus said, and like I said earlier, we've got 6,000 years where people did not need to know about the last days because they weren't living in the last days. They weren't going to see the last days in their life. They didn't need to know all the details. We do. We live in the last days. So when Jesus' apostles were on the earth with him and they sat down to talk about the last days, Jesus said, okay, look, I'm going to tell you about the last days. But this is what's important. You got to keep this in mind. As the last days get here, there are going to be a lot of false Christ, false teachers, false prophets, false apostles, and they're going to be telling you about stuff that's not important. They're going to be telling you about earthquakes, wars, famine, pestilence, all of these things that the church has used to instill fear into you so that you'll follow them off into destruction. Satan is, for whatever reason, he gets a kick out of knowing that he's going to cause a lot of people to do stupid stuff and get killed. Jesus said, don't listen to none of that. Here's what's going to happen. And he goes into this long thing about there will be signs in the sun and the moon and the stars. That's not figurative. When he said that stuff, he was talking about, the words, if you look at the Greek words, it's actual sun, moon, stars. That's what he was talking about. And so everybody in every religion on the earth knows about wars, famines, pestilence, earthquakes. those things that Jesus said. Don't listen to that. Now, technology, you know, getting rid of people's jobs and the economy crashing and the dollar bill not being equal to gold and all of those kind of fear things, which, you know, we live in this world, that's scary stuff. But those kinds of things are not what you got to be looking for. You know, you got to, sure, we can talk about them, but don't even try to say that the end of the world is, those are signs of the last days, because that is not signs of the last days. The only signs we're going to get about the last days that you can depend on are in the stars. And it ain't going to be no astrology stuff. You know, all this September 23rd stuff, and Saturn, Jupiter is going into Virgo, and it's going into a retrograde navigation around the sun. That stuff is silly, because if you go out there and look at it, all you're going to see is some teeny tiny little dots of light. I'm talking about looking up and seeing the rings of Saturn over your front porch. You know, the stuff that God does is not like the silly stuff that religion does. Okay, I'm done.
Well, what do you think about the technology aspect, though? Like Synoptic Problem says, if you're really anti-technology and civilization, then we should log off the computer and just, you know, walk away from it all.
I'm a cripple. I can't even hardly get out of bed. So if I cut this computer off, I'm cutting you off. You know, it's not like I'm going to walk to somebody's house and talk to them about this. Plus, that's not very effective. You know, God's children are spread out all over this planet. When I say his children, I mean 7 billion of them. It's not, I'm not talking about just the people that are here at Sustenance and Cover and listening to me go on rants. I'm talking about everybody on Earth. And the information has to be available, because what's going to happen, I suspect, is that 1,000 people are going to know what I'm saying. And that's all that's going to know what I'm saying. And the sun and the earth and the moon are going to go into conjunction. And those 1,000 people are going to get activated. You know, it's nice to sit in your chair in your house and listen to an old man talk crazy. But when you see these things with your eyes, you're going to turn into the old man talking crazy. And I don't care if you're a little girl. You'll be telling everybody you know that this was predicted in the Bible 6,000 years ago. Because a lot of people are going to look up and they're going, oh my God, where's Trump? You know, where's Obama? Where's our Savior? You don't want to be following whoever the Antichrist turns out to be. You want to be the person that looks up, lifts your head erect, and goes, thank God. Thank God. Oh, technology.
Yeah, Katie Cooks and Crafts chimes in that civilization and technology will distract people, and you never see the stars or nature when you're inside your house.
Yeah, well, here's the deal too about technology, and I think you and I have had this discussion. I think we may have even brought it up in podcasts or live streams before. Is that, you know, for the Earth, let's say that, you know, I'm right, Wacky Guy in Swamp is right, and that the Earth is only about 6,000 years old, or humanity's only been here 6,000 years. And if you go back and examine that, you know, technologically, we're supposed to believe that human beings make incremental increases in knowledge over time. And so you start off where a guy is out in the woods naked, no clothes, no spear, no hammer, nothing, and eventually realizes he can hit 2 rocks together and crack pecans or something. And then he says, you know what, if I'm going to pass this idea on to my friend, and my friend may be able to improve upon it. You know, well, the reality, that's not how this all happened. If you go back in time, you'll see that even in the very, very, very ancient past, there were guys that were tying rocks onto sticks, and pretty much up until 1850, there were people walking around with sticks that had a rock tied to the end of them. You know, we didn't go from the Stone Age to the Iron Age to the Bronze Age. We actually had guys that were doing stones in this part of the country or world where there are only stones. And then over here, a lot of iron deposit. Those people were living in an Iron Age. Over here, there's copper and there's tin. And so people are making bronze over here. It's not really like you just had this incremental increase in technology. And not only that, But basically, you had fire in the wheel. Well, these guys were making fire with rocks. These guys were making fire with bronze. These guys are making wheels with rocks, and these guys are making wheels with... But it's still just a fire and a wheel, and we had that all the way up until around 1800, and then people started using steam and water wheels, and we've got historically about 200 years of what would be called technology. You know, unless you're open-minded to some of the stuff that's on the, you know, on these documentaries where you go back in ancient Rome and these people were pouring concrete and they had trucks, and, you know, the Egyptians had airplanes and all that. Not that I believe in that, but I mean, the reality is we know that up until recently, the world pretty much worked the same as it did back in Adam and Eve days. It's only, you know, in the last couple of hundred years that we went from the wheel and fire to laptops. And that had to come from outside source. That's the whole point I'm making, is that human beings are pretty much limited in what they're gonna do. What they can do is not limited, but what they'll do on their own is limited. I really believe that when the demons started realizing that time was up, they started giving people hints about how to get stuff done.
And there's an interesting comment from the Chain of Hills. She chimes in and says, you know, technology can be used for either good or bad, and then she further comments that she no longer uses social media besides YouTube because of how much time it takes up, and you used to be a zombie when constantly going to Facebook, and finally she got disgusted with herself and quit, and it was so much worth it to get that burden off. So some technology apparently, I guess.
Hey, look, when I left Facebook, the day I left it, I actually left a message, and I actually used the F word. It's like, I'm done with all of y'all friends. I don't need friends. I want somebody that I can touch, because I'm done with friends. And I unfriended everybody and closed my account down.
Okay, well, let's see. It looks like the last question, and then you can take us out, is from Vincent S. They ask, are all the 10 Commandments still relevant?
They're all relevant, but
take us out.
Yeah, all of the 10 Commandments are still relevant. That is God's law. After this world is restored, it's the solar system's restored, all the dead are resurrected, the plants that have gone extinct are brought back, you know, the trees of life are right there where you can reach up and eat from them, and all of that's done away with. Then everybody will have to go back to the 10 Commandments, because that is God's natural law. Currently, it's good to know what the 10 Commandments actually mean, so we can kind of guide ourselves on them and actually kind of show whose side we're on. Are we for natural law, or are we for Satan's artificial law? Because, you know, when Moses went out into the wilderness, they stopped at Mount Sinai, and they asked for the God made him this law, 10 Commandments. God cut the stones. God carved in the stones. God gave the stones to Moses. He went down the mountain. Everybody was worshiping an artificial animal. He broke those stones. When he went back up, he didn't go up to get 10. He went up to get 100, 600 and something commandments, and God would not write them. It very clearly says that God said, you go cut your own stones, and then you come up here and you write the law. And then later on, you know, when Jesus was on earth, he talked about God's law never going away, but he said he always talked about the Jewish law as the law of Moses. He made a point of differentiating between the two. And so, you know, once this world is restored and the trees of life are there, then yes, we're going to have to stick to God's law. It won't be no more agriculture. There won't be no more dollar bills, nobody building houses, nobody doing any of this unnatural stuff. But currently, natural law is illegal. So if you want to stay out of jail, you're pretty much going to have to break the 10 Commandments. Well, anyways, we hope that y'all enjoyed this week's live stream, and that you'll stop by next week for the next live stream. We hope you go and check out the website, especially this week's podcast about prayer. And also, I was asked by one of the subscribers to remind him to go look at the resources available on the website, because I've posted probably over 1,000, I think almost 2,000 text documents about everything from how to go fishing, how to build a shelter, that kind of stuff. So that's there. Just wanted to remind everybody of that. And as always, we hope to see you next week. And if you don't want to survive, don't listen to us.